Welcome back to Yang Daily. I'll be your host, Alex Cheney, bringing you all the Yang news you need to live your life right. We've got some interesting legislative and literary action today. Let's get to it. For the first time ever, the House passed a bill to make Washington, D.C. a state. This doesn't mean it will pass the Senate, of course. In fact, it's quite unlikely to, but it's historic progress nonetheless. Personally, I am curious what the arguments against statehood are. I've never looked into it, but perhaps I will now. Humanity Forward is once again teaming up with Modern Health to offer a free medical health class. It will be on Tuesday, June 30th, and you can register at the link below. A middle school principal came out of nowhere and beat 30-year incumbent Elliot Engel for a congressional seat in New York. Yang has given him a soft endorsement, tweeting, quote, "I am very excited to have Jamal Bowman representing the people of New York 16 in D.C., end quote. Jamal is more or less running on Bernie's policies. He doesn't actually have an economics section on his website yet, but expressed support for a federal jobs guarantee. I assume he also supports a $15 minimum wage, though I didn't actually see it in my skimming. He also definitely supports single-payer M4A and wealth taxes. No mention of UBI, democracy reform, or any signature Yang policies as far as I know. His website says it's still being added to, though. New Zealand's former Prime Minister, Helen Clark, came out in support of UBI, according to a basic income article by Dan Satherley. She says, quote, "Given the mass loss of both income and employment caused by COVID-19, ensuring people have stable, sufficient income and employment opportunities will be critical to buffer against the effects of not only economic recession, but also high levels of loneliness, isolation, and psychological distress." End quote. No doubt about that. Happy to have you on board, Helen. Meanwhile, Matthew Rosa wrote a pretty good article on why we should all have a right to recreation. Here's the part that stuck out to me. Quote, "I am not arguing that society doesn't need workers or that laziness shouldn't be stigmatized. What I am arguing is that people often achieve their best selves when they aren't on the job, and that society is often best positioned to benefit from each individual's unique talents and abilities when they are figuring out how to excel with their gifts, regardless of whether the marketplace will accommodate them. Therein lies the wisdom of Twain's observation, as well as this one from Live Science's Simon Gottschalk. Quote of quote, "Music research and many spiritual and philosophical systems, Buddhism for example, suggest that detaching from daily concerns and spending time in simple reflection and contemplation are essential to health, sanity, and personal growth. Similarly, to equate doing nothing with non-productivity betrays a short-sighted understanding of productivity. In fact, psychological research suggests that doing nothing is essential for creativity and innovation, and a person's seeming inactivity might actually cultivate new insights, inventions, or melodies." End quote of quote within quote. It is notable that few people begrudge those who are born into extreme wealth and can afford to while away their hours indulging in pleasurable activities. It is only when the rest of society says that they too should have the ability to recreate as they choose, and not just for pleasure, but so they can find the best versions of themselves, that the intelligentsia reacts with horror. I think it's high time to bust that stigma, to touch that third rail, to move the right to recreation within the confines of the Overton window. If people have a right to health, they have a right to recreation, regardless of whether they have a job. Similarly, if society is to benefit as much as possible from everyone's unique individual skill sets, then we need to provide every person with the ability to explore those skill sets, regardless of whether they can find employment doing them. Society is harmed and individual rights are abridged when a person does not have time to play because society does not allow them to do that as work." End quote. Pretty similar to arguments I myself have made for why no one should be upset about people having the option of not being employed with UBI. I didn't know that there were studies to back it up. I just argued from common sense that more innovation comes from people with free time. As the author said, most people think of free time as unproductive, but it's really not. It's usually just a different kind of production, an unrestrained and creative kind. And that's where most innovative ideas live. Moreover, as we've also argued before, definitions of what counts as work and what counts as not work are pretty much entirely arbitrary. And we disenfranchise a lot of very important work when we treat work as only that done under employment. In so many ways, America needs to stop counterproductively trying to force work and let it happen in more natural and effective ways. Basic Income UK hosted a women's panel to discuss the benefits of UBI for women in particular. You can check that out at the link below. The viral outbreak in the South continues to grow worse. Florida alone had 9,000 new cases just yesterday, doubling their daily record from just 2 days earlier. Texas and Florida have both begun closing down businesses again, starting with bars. Arizona is also experiencing their worst outbreak yet, with testing sites seeing lines 1,000 cars long and restaurants shutting back down after the state's reopening of the economy under the mantra "return stronger" goes horribly wrong, but also entirely as epidemiologists told them it would. Public health experts warn that hospitals could be stretched so thin that they may begin triaging patients by mid-July. Will Humble, former director of the Arizona Department of Health Services, says, quote, "If you're in a bed, normally they'll keep you for a few days, but now they're going to send you home with oxygen," end quote. The virus is everywhere, the governor said, and that's largely due to the haphazard and blasé approach taken by him and the rest of Arizona's leadership, with the governor himself rarely donning a mask and misrepresenting the data in many ways. Much has happened all across the country, as well as on the federal level. Some are actively sabotaging efforts to control the virus, such as members of the Scottsdale City Council, Republican Guy Phillips, who co-opted the dying words of George Floyd shouting, "I can't breathe," before ripping off his mask at an anti-mask rally on Wednesday. The failure of elected officials to take the virus seriously has led citizens to do likewise, with many thinking the pandemic has blown over, refusing to wear masks or abide by social distancing rules. With the way it's being handled, it's no wonder why disease trackers at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia observed, quote, "Arizona has lost control of the epidemic," end quote. In addition to the season for pandemics, it's apparently the season for tell-all books on Trump, because another has emerged, this time from his niece, Mary. Mary is a clinical psychologist, so that ought to take it to a whole nother level. The book is said to be about Trump and their family's dysfunctional relationships that produced him. Or as she put it in the title of the book, "How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man." The publisher's description says it will, quote, "draw heavily on her studies of family dysfunction, with Mary using her clinical background to dissect a nightmare of traumas, destructive relationships, and a tragic combination of neglect and abuse, including the strange and harmful relationship between her late father and Donald," end quote. Her father, Trump's brother, drank himself to death when she was 16. As with Bolton's book, Trump is, of course, attempting to suppress the novel before its debut, but it doesn't seem there will be any lack of reading material on Trump's character running up to the election. The Intercept put out an article on whether populists on the left and right should work together or not, apparently sparked by some disagreement between Crystal and Sauger on Rising and some other group. It's more the Twitter thread around the article that I wanted to highlight because it contains a lot of people saying that you shouldn't work with any, as Hillary would say, deplorables. I felt I needed to comment on this topic because a lot of people seem to share this opinion, and I just want to clarify how incredibly dumb it is. If you disagree with a person's goals or criticize them for not working toward goals you want them to, that's fine. But saying they shouldn't work with anyone who has any positions you disagree with is stark raving madness. That would mean that if a Republican and Democrat both like UBI, they shouldn't work together to pass it because they disagree on abortion or something. It's ludicrous. That's literally arguing against progress of any kind or democracy in general, because the only way to get things done in a democracy, made of people who will never agree on everything, because we are all individuals with our own brains, is to find consensus. When you disagree on something, you look for alternate ways to find common ground on it. If you do find common ground, you work together to make that happen. When you can't find common ground, you compromise on something in the middle. That's how democracy works. That's how collective and representative rule works. UBI itself is a fantastic example of consensus, bringing together many goals of both conservatives and liberals into one solution that is palatable to both. If you just want a minority group to be able to have their way and ignore everyone else's wishes, that's some form of authoritarian government. We're not into authoritarianism in America. At least, we didn't used to be. And a refusal to work with others toward common goals is why we have gridlock in Congress. So, yes, people should work together when they have common ground. Freaking duh. Speaking of, Matthew Zwolinski has written up a really fantastic article for us, making the neoliberal argument for UBI. Broadly speaking, it consists of how UBI fits with classical conservative, neoliberal values of freedom, that it's the most pragmatic approach to welfare, and makes the Georgist moral argument for funding via land taxes. It's quite compelling and similar to arguments that I've made before, though focusing less on capitalism specifically. I absolutely recommend everyone give it a read and bookmark it. Familiarity with these kinds of arguments are crucial to our helping create a consensus position on UBI among all ideologies. Moving on, Yang tweeted out an ad today for Bola Wrap, a small gun for police that fires a thin bola cord to instantly entangle a person's arms or legs. It's a nifty little gadget. Obviously, the idea is to use it instead of a lethal firearm as a first attempt to subdue a dangerous subject. It could still harm someone if they trip and fall in a bad way, or if it wrapped around the neck or face. And at this point, I can pretty much guarantee some cops out there would intentionally aim for those areas. I guess if it prevents any shootings, then it's improvement, but I do expect it would be used pretty liberally. And clearly, there's no defense against it. Aside from just adopting a wide stance and holding your arms out from your sides. Finally, the horse stance I was taught in jujutsu has a purpose. Fortunately, all of the targets in the demonstrations conveniently kept their arms and legs close together, and it worked like a charm. The New York Times published a pretty decent article arguing the link between racial and economic justice. Might be worth sticking that in the bookmarks to help convince people that UBI should be part of the push for racial justice, or, just point them to MLK. Finally, YangGangArt.com has produced some very stylish YangGang merch. Not sure if they're coasters or what, but they're flat, decorated memes. One has Be the Wave, #YangGang on a square. Another has #YangGangLove on a sort of Spock hand. And the last has Whatever It's Cool, #YangGangLove on a longer rectangle. They are pretty cool. Check out the website below. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Sign up for HF's mental health class if you could use some decompression. Check out the women's panel on UBI. Bookmark the neoliberal article. Help advocate for clear, fundamental policy goals for the protests. If you're going out to protest, wear protection, especially on your eyes, head, and throat. If you get arrested while protesting, remember not to say anything without a lawyer. Whatever you choose to do, be wise, be safe, and act with measured purpose toward real solutions. And don't forget to Yang Daily.